Murdered in Paris, buried in Israel, the 4 Jews taken hostage and shot in a kosher supermarket. The son of one said his French father had always wanted to live in Israel. He is here now, he said. In Paris, where the men were murdered, Jews debate their future and their security.
Two countries clashing over crimes against humanity and terrorism. On one side, a longtime American ally in the Middle East, Israel, whose foreign minister called the president of another nation an anti-Semitic bully. On the other side, that other president, leading the only Muslim member of NATO and supposed ally in the war on ISIS, Turkey, who compared the deaths of French journalists at the hands of terrorists to civilian deaths in the Gaza Strip from bombs dropped by Israeli warplanes. Two sides that a few days ago joined hands in peace and wasted no time getting right back to the verbal fists of war. It's a pleasure to welcome to Midpoint the national president of the Zionist Organization of America, Mort Klein, joins us here in studio. Mort, thank you so much for coming in.
Good to be with you, and here in Florida.
Exactly, nice and warm as well.
Beautiful.
Are we looking at a ratcheting up here, if you will, because here's Erdogan, the president of Turkey, accused of being an anti-Semitic bully after he went after Benjamin Netanyahu for daring to attend an anti-terror rally in Paris.
Erdogan's statement about Israel intentionally killing civilians is absurd. If Hamas, the terrorist group whose charter, Article 7, calls for the murder of every Jew, did not launch 4,000 missiles against Israel, Israel would not have responded. Israel went into Gaza to defend its citizens, to plead with Hamas to stop the missiles. After a week, Israel even called for a ceasefire. Hamas refused. After 2 weeks, Israel said, let's have a ceasefire. Hamas agreed, and 24 hours later, there were more missiles. No missiles from Hamas to kill innocent Jews in Israel. There'd be no retaliation from Israel to simply try and stop these missiles in Israel. Erdogan's statement is absurd.
But what does this then tell us about, perhaps, and I mentioned that ratcheting up again, because here's Turkey, a nation who back in 2002 or so was seen by the United States and so many people as a great example of what could be the new Middle East. Now here we have a country that basically is saying, we stand for a lot of these Islamic principles. We're going to get behind them and going against the people who are looking for peace. What does this tell us?
I remember when Erdogan became the head of Turkey, there was great hope he would be a different type of leader, a rational, pro-West leader who would be fighting Islamic terrorism. Everyone was wrong. The Jewish communities were honoring Erdogan in those days. Everyone was wrong. He turned out to be nothing less than another radical Islamic jihadist terrorist, promoting hatred and murder and violence against Jews and even the West.
How did everybody get it so wrong?
Because his words when he was running were rational and decent and reasonable words. Just like when Mahmoud Abbas speaks to the West, his words generally are decent. But when he speaks to the Arabs, he urges them to use cars to go and kill Jews in Israel. He praises Hamas. He's aligned himself with Hamas. He glorifies Islamic terrorists, Abbas does, by naming schools, streets, and sports teams after them. Imagine, honoring and glorifying terrorists, and he gives pensions, and few people know this, he gives pensions to the families of suicide bombers who died killing Jews, and he gives pensions to the families of prisoners and Israeli prisoners of terrorists who have murdered Jews. He gives them pensions. So people are not aware of the truth and the reality of Mahmoud Abbas or Erdogan because they haven't heard them speaking to their own people.
Well, let's get away from Abbas for a moment here because that's sort of a side issue here. But let's stay on Erdogan here for the moment because he is the guy who says everybody joined hands at this wonderful show of solidarity in Paris, and then he immediately goes up and attacks Israel. Should we be paying more attention to what's happening in Turkey, and are we kidding ourselves if we think that they're on our side and they're really trying to help tamp down the anti-Semitism and the radicalism in the Middle East?
Yes. Erdogan is a strong supporter of Islamic terrorists who have murdered Jews and murdered Americans and Westerners. He sent 8 or 9 Turkish nationals to go and break the legal blockade of Hamas, which simply was trying to stop missiles from coming into Hamas, which Israel knew would be used against them. So he's now shown in every way, shape, and form that he is on the wrong side of history, is in favor of the Islamic terrorists against Westerners and against Jews and against Israel. When you go to Turkey, the synagogues not only have guards, as most synagogues around the world now do, they actually are paved over, so you can't even tell it's a synagogue now with Erdogan in power.
We're now talking about, and there's a couple of stories out there today that want rabbis to be armed to start carrying weapons in Europe because of what happened in France. Is that smart? Is that necessary?
The first thing Hitler did when he came to power is he disarmed all the citizenry. He didn't want anyone to have weapons because he knew when he was going to go in there, he didn't want to have any problems with people being able to defend themselves. Yes, I think it's gotten so bad that all people should consider arming themselves.
Including the rabbis.
Absolutely, including rabbis, because especially ones who look visibly like a rabbi, in terms of a hat or a beard or think something of that, or a yarmulke, they become clear targets. Yes, so I think rabbis and Westerners should rethink whether they want to arm themselves, because we have Islamic terrorists now in Australia and Canada. We have cells all over America, and we had 9/11, and God forbid, I'm really worried we're going to have those types of attacks again here.
What kind of a message, though, would that send to people if they see their rabbi in a local community packing heat?
The reality of the world we're living in is a growing scourge of Islamic jihadist terrorism, whose goal is killing as many infidels and non-Muslims as possible, and to create a caliphate in the future. Iran openly calls for a caliphate, so do other Muslim leaders. Thank God Sisi, the head of Egypt, only last week made a speech saying we need a transformation and a revolution and a reformation of Islam to stop promoting this type of hatred and violence against people in the West and non-Muslims.
By what you just said, I would guess that you have a problem with the president and his administration not wanting to put the words radical and extremism in the same sentence.
Well, it's shocking. Virtually all the terrorism in the world has been done by Muslims in the name of Islam. So we have to call it what it is to know who we're fighting, know who we're going to fight against. Not only hasn't he used the term, he has had the government documents, military documents, delete all reference to Islamic terrorism. You cannot use the term in any government document. When the Islamic psychiatrist murdered 13 American soldiers, Obama referenced this as workplace violence, not radical Islam, even though his card says soldier of Allah, and he was screaming Ahalu Akbar, God is great in Arabic, when he was murdering the 13 patriotic U.S. soldiers.
30 seconds. Why would he do this? Just to make friends?
All I can say is President Obama's father was a Muslim. He went to Muslim schools till he was 12. He seems to have a sympathy and a sensitivity to Muslims because of his own background. The fact that when his first foreign policy speech in Egypt, he urged and demanded and required and requested the Muslim Brotherhood, the mother of all terrorist groups, to come to his speech and sit in the front rows, even though Mubarak begged him, do not invite this unlawful terrorist group. I won't show up if you do. He did it anyway. It's frightening to think that he has some sensitivity and sympathy to radical Muslims.
We are all out of time, unfortunately. Mort Klein, thank you so much for coming in here today and sharing your thoughts with us. Break, and let's bring it back home to the shores and the never-ending battle between good and evil on a football field.
New rules go into effect tomorrow, making it easier for Americans to travel to Cuba. I'm Olga Villaverdi, and this story tops your Newsmax Now update. The rules are part of the normalization of relations with Cuba, announced by President Obama. Americans who travel to Cuba for one of a dozen accepted reasons no longer need federal approval. Indianapolis Colts linebacker Josh McNary denies rape allegations after he was arrested last night. Police say after the rape, the victim accidentally grabbed McNary's phone, leading police back to him. Federal investigators foil a terror plot to attack the U.S. Capitol. Police arrested Christopher Cornell after he bought guns and ammo. Authorities say Cornell was inspired by ISIS. And finally, Pope Francis continues his trip around the world, landing in the Philippines today. The Pope has touched on the attacks in Paris, saying he supports free speech, but says there are limits when it insults someone's faith. And that's your Newsmax Now update. More coming your way in 30 minutes. We'll see you then.